There is a plant growing in your backyard that the British Empire spent 2 centuries trying to erase. It is America's only native source of caffeine. For 8,000 years it fueled entire civilizations. It kept warriors alert for days without sleep. It powered the American Revolution when colonists threw British tea into Boston Harbor. Then, in 1789, a royal botanist gave it a name designed to destroy it. One word: vomitoria, the holly that makes you vomit. The name was a lie. But it worked. Within decades, this super tea vanished from memory, while we shipped billions of pounds of inferior substitutes across oceans. This is the story of Yaupon holly, the forgotten stimulant that threatened an empire, and the conspiracy that buried it for 2 centuries. Welcome to Nature's Lost Vault. Before we open this vault, if these stories matter to you, the best way to preserve this wisdom is simple. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share these vaults with those who need to remember what we forgot. The archive opens in Titusville, Florida, 1982. A backhoe operator pulls debris from a pond, clearing ground for a new road. His bucket surfaces with human skulls. Work stops. Archaeologists arrive expecting bones 500, maybe 600 years old. Carbon dating reveals the truth. They are 7,000 to 8,000 years old. This is the oldest intact burial site in North America. But what stuns researchers is not the age. It is what the bodies contain. Chemical analysis detects caffeine, theobromine, and ursolic acid in precise ratios. The same compounds are found in one plant, Yaupon holly. These people were drinking caffeinated tea 3,000 years before tea was discovered in China. This was not an accident. This was civilization. Fast forward to 1100 AD. Cahokia, Illinois, a sprawling city of 20,000 people in the heart of the Mississippi Valley, hundreds of miles from any ocean. Archaeologists uncover ceremonial beakers coated with residue. The coating tests positive for Yaupon. But Yaupon only grows on the Atlantic and Gulf coasts. These people were trading it across 800 miles of wilderness, not for luxury, for necessity. The Timucua of Florida called it Arsi. The Creek called it Casina. The Cherokee called it the beloved tree. When naturalist William Bartram traveled through Cherokee territory in 1775, he wrote that they cultivated it with reverence, pruning branches, protecting groves, trading leaves like currency. This was not just a plant. This was power. The leaves contain caffeine at levels comparable to green tea, 60 milligrams per cup. But Yaupon does something tea and coffee cannot. It contains theobromine, the pleasure molecule found in chocolate, at a 5-to-1 ratio with caffeine. The combination delivers clean, focused energy without jitters, without crashes. It also contains theophylline, which dilates blood vessels and improves oxygen circulation. Warriors of the Natchez tribe carried dried Yaupon on raids because it made them less susceptible to thirst, hunger, and exhaustion. This gave them a crucial endurance advantage. Yaupon contains 0 tannins. Unlike Asian tea or coffee, Yaupon cannot be oversteeped. It never turns bitter. It never stains teeth. It never upsets stomachs. Its antioxidant levels rival blueberries. University of Florida studies in 2009 confirmed Yaupon contains chlorogenic acids, camphorol, and polyphenols with anti-inflammatory and cancer-preventive properties. This was not folk medicine. This was biochemical engineering 8,000 years before laboratories existed. When Spanish explorers arrived in Florida in 1535, they encountered the black drink. By 1615, a Spanish priest wrote that there was no Spaniard or Indian who did not drink it every day, in the morning or in the evening. They described symptoms we now recognize as caffeine dependence. The Spanish called it té del indio. They were addicted within a generation. English colonists in the Carolinas learned to harvest Yaupon by the early 1700s. They called it Cassina, Carolina tea, and Indian tea. By the late 1700s, it had become more common than imported British tea. Cheaper, local, abundant. Plantations across the South cultivated it. Enslaved people drank it. Plantation owners drank it. It crossed class lines because it simply worked. Then American merchants did something dangerous. They started exporting it to Europe. The French called it Appalachina. The English called it South Sea tea. It sold for half the price of Asian tea. And it tasted better. No bitterness, no need for sugar to mask the flavor. Sugar was expensive. Sugar required plantations. Sugar required slavery. Yopon threatened the entire economic model. In 1783, German botanist Johann David Schopf wrote in his journal that Yopon tea had become so popular that the British East India Company was increasingly alarmed about it as a threat to their control of the world tea market. This was not paranoia. This was economic war. The British East India Company controlled global trade. They made fortunes from tea, sugar, and the slave trade that supported sugar plantations. King George III personally profited from tea taxation. A Native American plant that required no imports, no middlemen, and no taxation was not competition. It was an existential threat. Enter William Ayton, royal gardener at Kew Gardens, personal friend of King George III. In 1789, just 6 years after the Revolutionary War humiliated Britain, Ayton was tasked with fixing a botanical error. Carl Linnaeus had mistakenly given Yopon and Dahoon holly the same Latin name, Ilex caffeine. Ayton reassigned caffeine to Dahoon holly, which had no caffeine and no value. Then he renamed Yopon Ilex vomitoria. Vomitoria, the holly that makes you vomit. It was a lie. Ayton knew it was a lie. Yopon had been grown in Kew Gardens for 90 years without making anyone sick. No emetic compounds exist in the plant. Scientists have tested it repeatedly. Nothing. But Ayton was clever. He had observed reports of Native American purification ceremonies, where warriors drank massive quantities of concentrated Yopon after days of fasting, then vomited. The vomiting was ceremonial, induced by seawater or other additives, not the plant itself. Ayton took that context, stripped it away, and weaponized it. One word: vomitoria. Effective immediately. Every botanical reference, every export manifest, every market listing carried that name. The holly that makes you vomit. Would you buy it? Would you serve it to guests in a London salon? Would you export it to Europe, where wealthy customers demanded elegance? The conspiracy worked perfectly. Within decades, Yopon exports to Europe collapsed. It became associated with poverty, with rural southerners, with indigenous people the empire wanted erased. Gentlemen demonstrated wealth by drinking expensive imported British tea, not savage local brews. But Yopon does not surrender easily. During the American Revolution, when Boston threw British tea into the harbor, Yopon flooded north under the name Liberty Tea. It kept the rebellion caffeinated. During the Civil War, when Union blockades cut off southern ports, Yopon processing plants on the Outer Banks worked overtime. Confederate soldiers stayed alert on Carolina tea, while Northern forces drank imported coffee. After the war, the stigma returned. Indian tea. Poor man's coffee. The drink of enslaved people and lower classes. As America grew wealthier, Yopon vanished. Coffee became the symbol of progress. Soda became the symbol of modernity. By 1900, Yopon had disappeared from markets, from restaurants, from memory. Only a few isolated communities remembered. The Outer Banks served it in cafes until the 1970s. Ocracoke Island was the last known location. then nothing. But the plant never left. It grows wild from Virginia to Texas. Millions of Americans walk past it daily, trimmed into hedges, planted as ornamental shrubs, thriving in yards as decorative bushes with bright red berries. They have no idea it contains caffeine. No idea it powered civilizations. No idea the British Empire spent centuries trying to destroy it. In 2020, something shifted. A few farmers, historians, and botanists started asking questions. Why are we importing 250,000 tons of tea every year when a superior plant grows for free? Why are we shipping 3.5 billion pounds of coffee across oceans when your pond thrives in sandy soil with almost no water? Why does one name, given by one botanist, still control what we drink 235 years later? Companies like Catspring Yaupon, Yaupon Brothers, and Rise Yaupon began harvesting it commercially. Whole Foods listed it as a top food trend in 2023. Chefs in Austin, Florida, and North Carolina started brewing it in restaurants. People tasted it. They liked it. Smooth, earthy, no bitterness. And the energy was different. Clean, focused, no jitters, no crash. Studies confirmed what Indigenous people always knew. Yaupon's unique combination of caffeine, theobromine, and theacrin delivers sustained mental clarity. The lack of tannins makes it gentle on digestion. The polyphenols support gut health, cardiovascular function, and cognitive performance. And because it grows locally, the carbon footprint is a fraction of imported coffee or tea. But here is what the studies cannot measure. Yaupon grew here. It survived here. It fed people here for 8,000 years before corporations decided what we should drink. It does not need patents. It does not need laboratories. It does not need permission. It just grows. The name Ilex vomitoria still exists. Taxonomists will not change it. Too much precedent. Too much history. But every time someone brews a cup, they prove the name was always a lie. The conspiracy worked for 2 centuries. It kept an empire profitable. It erased indigenous knowledge. It replaced a superior plant with inferior imports. But empires fall, markets shift, and Yaupon still grows, waiting in backyards, roadsides, forests. The beloved tree, the super tea the British tried to destroy. It outlasted the empire. It outlasted the lie. And it is still here, growing without permission, thriving without control. If this vault opened something for you, subscribe to Nature's Lost Vault and hit the bell. Every like and every share preserves what they tried to erase. The next vault opens soon.